The real liars here are the Biden DOJ officials who did this, and they're dangerous. They're criminals, in my opinion. But
you're important to everybody that cares about you. You're important to the people around you.
If we don't think people are important, then what do we think is important? Everybody I've ever talked to, and there's many people, are like, yeah, it's could get away from us and enslave us. Well, let's say no to slavery. How's that? Is that a tough one? Not for me.
So, Joe Rogan invited over one of the biggest presences on TV and social media, Tucker Carlson, the celebrity who used Fox News to catapult himself into his golden era. Shockingly, that same channel disposed of him last April when Carlson decided to keep growing bigger and disrespect the system he was in. Now, before I get into the juicy details of their podcast, I will say that I'm a fan of Carlson's ramblings, those in which he doesn't tend to go overboard with his massively inflated ego. The guy knows his stuff, particularly one that comes straight from rumors of Fantasyland. In this episode of Joe Rogan Experience, Carlson and Joe Rogan talk about politics, Kona Blue, the universe, and anything that can justify their existence on the planet for now. The podcast starts with these two reading off a tweet that talks about Kona Blue, which evidently fuels the narcissistic fire inside Carlson.
You can't. You're an idiot. You're a person. Like, you
Right.
can't even make your wife happy.
Right.
Like, the limits of your power are really obvious. The limits of your wisdom, same. And do what you can, knowing that you're probably going to screw it up and you probably won't achieve your goal, but like, you should try. Everybody I've ever talked to, and there's many people, are like, yeah, it's could get away from us and enslave us. Well, let's say no to slavery. How's that? Is that a tough one? Not for me. No, I'm serious. Like, why is that crazy?
It's not. It's not if you think that human beings are the end of this evolutionary chain.
Well, what else is? Some supercomputer in a data center outside Dulles Airport? No. I mean, you know what I mean?
Carlson is so up high horse that you can visibly see he's about to explode with information and enthusiasm. Probably would have been cute if it was coming from a child and not a 54-year-old man. Even Rogan takes a moment to laugh when Carlson starts talking about nuclear weapons and using them to blow up data centers. Okay, in all honesty, he may have a point, but when you hear the guy talk, it's almost like he's getting worked up over nothing. My problem with this guy is that he bounces around too much, never sticking to one thing, and I'm not pointing the finger at just this podcast. Ever since his firing from Fox, Carlson has been scooping up and appearing in all sorts of news. Only 2 months ago, he was spotted in Russia, and we still don't know what he was going to do. Maybe it was another attempt to interview Vladimir Putin because last time the US government didn't allow him to do so, or maybe he was just there for recreational purposes. Who knows?
That individuals, I don't think I'm that important. My life is that important. I don't. I will die. I know that.
But you're important to everybody that cares about you. You're important to the people
But
around you.
if we don't think people are important, then what do we think is important?
Not
Sam?
necessarily that we don't think people are important, but if evolution is real, and if there is this
Is it real?
constant animals,
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true. Right?
In what sense?
At this point, I honestly feel like Joe is having to come in and validate Carlson's existence, because otherwise the man might end up in tears. On one side, Carlson is talking about death and nobody cares about him and won't remember him, yada yada yada. And on the other, Rogan is trying desperately to bring him back into greener grasslands by saying his family cares about him and he's gotta hang on, all while not maintaining eye contact because he knows he's lying.
So for me, training and really hard workouts and doing difficult things like the sauna, there's a lot of health benefits to it too. Because it makes
That's impressive,
the
man.
rest
I
of
didn't
life
have a
easier.
childhood like that at all.
And you don't have to do it the way I do it. You could do other stuff. You could do yoga. You could do hikes. You could do.
No,
you
but
could
doing
run.
things for the sake of the difficulty in doing them, again, that was not my training at all.
Yeah.
But
I was very lucky that it was mine. But more importantly, it gave me a tool to mitigate the stress of regular life. Mm-hmm.
Nature works very, very well. I think that this stuff's not good for you. It's just so obviously not good for you.
And now we transition into what seems like therapy. Joe is a man with a background filled with gym training the body and the mind to handle adversity and getting good at it, while the other is trained at spewing all sorts of obscenities from his mouth, and that's about it. Carlson keeps getting these fits of self-doubt, and Joe keeps on roping him back in. It's almost sad, terribly entertaining if you're looking at it from my eye. You know, the guy needs therapy more than he needs this podcast.
Yeah,
it's really
funny.
the marker of our time. It's like, I have nothing against dumb people at all. My dogs are dumb, and I love my dogs. No, I'm serious. I don't think God cares about your intelligence, right? Only people care. Better people than I am.
Yeah.
You know, more likely to go to heaven. So I'm not attacking her for being dumb, but the idea that a dumb person has the White House press secretary is in the same category, who has no idea she's dumb. I'm the best talker in America. So
All right, can we take a moment to acknowledge how cleverly Carlson brings in the topic of dumb people, dogs, and Alexandria Cortez and forms this mulch that intertwines all three? I am appalled at how confident this guy is at still using words so sensitive, so dangerously close to women when he's already been labelled as having a penchant for demeaning women. I get that this guy has a whole encyclopedia on politics living around in his head, but to go so far as to say dogs are dumb, eating out of vending machines is dumb, and then roping political figures into the muck as well is very ballsy. But I guess that's what Mr. Carlson is, a big bag of balls.
That he said
repeating Russian propaganda
about
the invasion of Ukraine. But that's hardly a crackpot view, by the way. I think that's actually true. But even if you don't agree that it's true, that's not, you don't have to be a paid propagandist from the Kremlin to say that.
right.
I have said it. I'm not a paid propagandist.
Is this
from
a
the Kremlin.
gentleman?
That's him right there.
4 Americans from a
Amalia
black empowerment
should-
organization work with Russian
You should tell
intelligence to spread propaganda, feds
Yes.
say.
Now, this guy is a strong supporter of Trump and his MAGA parade, and he lets no opportunity pass by where he can't demean how the Biden administration has left no stone unturned in providing the fuel necessary to support the war in Ukraine. According to Carlson, Biden's decision instigated Putin, which ultimately led him to declaring war on Ukraine. But here's where it gets interesting. Carlson says you don't have to be a paid propagandist to say such stuff, and then reiterates that he himself is not a paid propagandist. And he doesn't make eye contact when he says the last bit. Connect the dots with me here. I won't say anything, but I'm pretty sure you and I are on the same page.
The genocide of African people. The United Nations petition of 2015 to decry the genocide of African people in the U.S., according to the indictment.
The real liars here are the Biden DOJ officials who did this, and they're dangerous. They're criminals, in my opinion. So
they went over to
by
Russia
the way, but the way this typically works is they say, well, you went to a country against which we've imposed sanctions,
Right.
and you violated the sanctions regime in some way. Like, that's how they get you.
But
that's
that
not.
they learned those when they went over to Russia?
It's
They
all on,
learned
no,
these
it's all on the
things?
internet. They're
But
that
these
they
people,
learned them.
that
I mean,
they-
I guess it doesn't matter where they learned them. I don't, the genocide of African peoples in America. I don't even know what that means.
I cannot stress enough on how this man still has such a burn when it comes to people, especially political administrations, dissing on him. Carlson again says that the Biden administration is a bunch of liars, although isn't that what all politicians are? And that having opinions is the only crime. I'll give that to him. It seems that having opinions, funnily enough, goes against the state that declares itself free to its people. Carlson takes a step further and adds how his adventures to Russia and beyond should have been okay with the government, and that whatever he said should have been either covered up or penned down as legit. But here's the thing. When you represent a global television channel, a state or a country, you can't go prancing off and start talking to entities that your state frowns upon. You can't make decisions when you're not in that chair. Carlson at this point considers himself a one-man show, and that is the reason national agencies keep him at arm's length.
And they have to ignore that on their way to creating utopia in some foreign country. And you're like, does it ever occur to you? And you're telling me how we're going to make Eastern Europe into, this brave new world. I'm not super sensitive or aware or anything. I'm not super anything, really. I'm pretty ordinary, but I think I would notice. But then you've got to think, like, maybe there's something bigger going on, actually. Like, there are a lot of people who seem to be just, like, for evil for its own sake.
I never took Carlson as much of a patriot because he's so busy self-glorifying himself, but apparently he's very concerned for his fellow Americans. Watch how he first talks about soldiers and order fatigue, drug addiction, and walking across all kinds of shit that affects them, and then quickly gets a fit saying, I'm not super sensitive or aware, which on the contrary, and by the looks of it, kinda does feel like it. At this point, Joey's just going with the flow and not getting hyper or anything because he knows what kind of child he's dealing with, but my word, just watch Carlson display an entire rainbow of emotions just to justify the sorry state of affairs he's embroiled in his head.
You know, I don't possess a drone fleet. There's nothing I can do about it, actually. That's the truth. You are literally powerless. Yeah, the New York Times is a conduit for the lies of government. That's what it is. It's their tool, and they're perfectly aware of that. But they think that it's worth it because they're bringing information. Or I don't know what they think, actually. But no, they're tools of power. Even if they are, they shouldn't do it because the job of the media, the press, is to keep power in check. And then he shows up like a year later, and he's this brand new reporter. He'd never been a journalist at all. He's a naval intel officer. And he's at the Washington Post, and somehow he gets the biggest story in the history of the Washington Post. He's the lead guy in that story. To bounce the single most popular president in American history, Richard Nixon, from office before the end of his term, and replace him with who? Oh, Gerald Ford, who sat on the Warren Commission. Something else that I accepted at face value until I looked at it and I was like, that's completely insane. You didn't want to interview Jack Ruby in your investigation of the assassination? Okay, you're fake. Yeah, he was on the Warren Commission. I think it was 6 of them or 7 of them. All but one was a CIA employee.
This total gem of a person spewed a complete galore of information, from calling New York Times an agent for the government to declaring past presidents as fake and puppets. This guy's on a roller coaster of hate. Watch his face slowly turn red as well throughout the length of this podcast. Obviously, he knows a lot of American history and politics, but this guy's asking for trouble by pointing fingers in all sorts of directions. Very interesting, very dangerous. Joe's getting his views on this one.